All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Patrick, Rick, thank you guys so much for joining me here today. How are you, gentlemen?
Excellent.
Fine, thanks.
Awesome. Cool. Well, so this kind of all started from a post I put on LinkedIn, and let me share that real fast, where I failed my solutions architect associate exam. So we could talk about the experience here in a bit, but I jumped in with the cloud practitioner, studied for a few days. I had a couple years experience with AWS, passed it. I tried to do the same thing with this exam, and it bit me in the hiney. So from that, it kind of stirred some conversation. We said, look, I know a few people who are really well AWS certified, and that's why you gentlemen are here today. So thank you guys for joining me. Rick, Patrick, I want to do a quick introduction real quick. If each of you can just give me a quick 30 seconds on who you are and why AWS.
Go, Patrick.
Ladies first. I'll go right ahead. I am Patrick Pearson. I run the cloud infrastructure team for IronNet Cybersecurity. Why AWS? That's an excellent question. I think the one they pay me to say is because they're the best. Just kidding. Amazon just has a huge amount of services. They, aside from the occasional issue that may take down an entire region, like the Kinesis outage the other day, they just consistently provide an incredible environment that you can do anything in. Is why AWS. We've done some stuff with Azure, and Azure's fine, but I consistently find myself saying, I'm going to do it in Amazon. I'm going to do it in Amazon because they can do it.
Yeah, and they can, and they've proven it to us time and time again. All right, Rick, up to you. Is IronNet the first time you've touched AWS? Where did you start with AWS, and where are you now?
So I was working at NGA, and they were moving to E2C, I think is the name of it, the high side network, AWS. A lot more limited services. But as a chief engineer, I was very high level, right? Just drawing diagrams and having developers do the real work. And so I was invited to come here by Tree Nguyen, and one of the benefits of coming here was actually being able to get more hands-on with AWS, right? So that was a real plus joining IronNet to get more involved.
Awesome. Well, and we got to do a quick plug. So there's a gentleman on this call who's been putting together AWS meetup groups for a long time now. It's been a pleasure to be part of these. He didn't know I was going to throw him in this call at all. He wasn't even supposed to be here until 5 minutes ago. But Patrick, you've been putting together these meetup groups. You got a few seconds. Throw a quick plug out there. Talk to me about these meetup groups and what you guys are doing next.
It's AWS Frederick. It's about 500 folks in the Frederick, Maryland area. I think it's kind of expanded outside of Frederick ever so slightly. It's just talking about Amazon all day. Well, all day that we do a meetup. It's a pretty good group. There's a couple of different organizers now. And it's really just a meetup group to talk about Amazon Web Services. It focuses entirely on Amazon Web Services. We get some folks from Amazon to come out from time to time. Stephen Alexander, a good friend of mine who's a solutions architect with Amazon, actually focuses really on the government side of things for Amazon. Former Marine, I don't hold that against him, but he comes out. He's always happy to give us a talk on something security wise in Amazon. Actually, on the 21st of December, Max Anderson from IronNet works for me. He's going to be doing a talk on an open source project he and a couple other folks put together called Reflex, which allows you to kind of employ some automation that doesn't necessarily come out of the box from Amazon, really quickly and easily apply that to an environment, to an account, and kind of get some notifications via CloudTrail. Super quick, and it's incredibly easy to set up. It's called Reflex. He's given that talk on the 21st. It's going to be streamed through Discord. So if you Google AWS Frederick, will be the top result. You can sign up for that meetup.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, and I know LinkedIn isn't approving a lot of people for LinkedIn live streaming. So sync up with me. We may be even able to stream it live through the IronNet account because they were just recently approved. So we'll circle back on that. I remember the time we did the Deep Racer stuff. Really cool, hands-on with Deep Racer. They had the whole racing mat and everything, and everyone was building their own algorithms to see who could race the fastest. So really cool stuff. Thanks for putting those together, Patrick.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Cool. Well, let's jump back into the reason for this live stream. First of all, I want to address everybody who's on here live, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. Feel free to ask questions. I mean, these are the pros. Rick, Patrick, these guys live it. They are developing in AWS daily. So thank you guys for joining me. But feel free to ask any questions you guys have, and we'll try to address it here or after this live stream. So let's go ahead and pivot over real quick. I want to share screen real fast, and let's see how this works. So quick background. I believe I am probably the least AWS certified here. I currently have the Cloud Practitioner and the Cloud Solutions Architect Associate. Now, Rick, I saw you posted not too long ago that you had the Solutions Architect Professional, which is all the way on the right in the green. Do you mind talking to me through your journey with a few of those?
Yeah, sure. So I first joined IronNet back in April 2018. And after about 6 months on board, I think it was, getting familiar with a lot of the different services, right? I decided to validate that knowledge with the Cloud Practitioner. And let me just say, right, all these exams are a little challenging, right, when you're at that level, right? So I thought the Cloud Practitioner exam was a good little test. And I was very happy just to see pass, flash up on the screen for that one, as I was happy to see pass flash up on the screen for the professional exam. But between the two exams, the extreme is like an order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude tougher, right? So, but it all comes down to prep. Actually, I think one of the most important pieces of my prepping for each of those was colleagues at IronNet, right? So I want to say a big shout out to Tree Nguyen, Sean Chung, right, for the stuff that they were teaching me along the way. Brooks Isolde was a guy who really kind of hammered home how to decouple architectures using SQS and SNS and serverless with Lambda, right? I think one of the most important things that you can put into it is hands-on experience. And, the challenging part about these tests, right, I don't think the cert itself is like the big deal. I think the prepping for the cert is the big deal, right? That I think is where you get your most value. And I think if you're just into taking tests, it's probably not as good as if you're trying to, get the hands-on experience. The problem is, right, there's just so many services that AWS has that these tests they cover everything, at least the solution architects, right? So you have to know like this much stuff. The test will test you on this much stuff, but you have no idea what's going to be on that test, right? With the specialty exams, they try to take off some of those things, right? So you're not going to get a lot of deep questions on the solutions architect about SageMaker, but you may have a few, right? So you have to kind of have a lot of stuff on the burner, keeping it warm when you go into these things. And I think that's the challenge because you're going to be asked potentially about all kinds of stuff, right, when you go in there.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to throw this back up here. Rick, you mentioned you have those. Do you have any other specialty certifications? And if you don't, what's kind of next on the list for you?
Early on, I got Java programmer, okay, and then Java developer. Java developer was an interesting one because you actually had to write code. And then it was the easiest cert to get from taking the test standpoint because once you got the code working, they gave you like an interface and they gave you a description of the architecture, and then you coded it up and you submitted the source code to Sun at the time, right? And they took a look at it and they, gave you an exam, right? And the exam was answer questions about your project and how you implemented certain aspects of that project, right? Mm-hmm. And the test was simply, well, I use these variable names. I did this, I did that. And, like question like, how did you ensure synchronous access to different things, right? Or, and then you just say, well, in my case, I said, well, I'm not really sure it worked, but here's what I did, right? And if if you're the programmer, you got the code in your head, right? You can answer those questions. You know what variable names, the methods, the structure of your app. And it was a pass, right? And in retrospect, that was one of the easiest tests I took, right? But it took 2 months to write the code, and then submit that to Sun. So that was the challenging part.
Yeah, no, that does not sound easy for what I do, right? So yeah, definitely an interesting perspective there.
Yeah, I think I got the ITIL, right, which I think was the trickiest test because those questions are, I don't know. It was a miracle I passed that one. It
Policy based.
like every question was like, I don't know, man, this is pretty slippery here. I'm not sure. So, but I got that one, but it was a while back.
Very cool. Well, Patrick, over to you real quick. I want to hear, so it sounds like the Java cert was one of the easier ones. That wasn't an AWS cert though, right, Rick?
No.
Yeah, so there are developer certs for AWS, but that was a specific Java one. Now, Patrick, when it comes to these certs, what do you have currently? And kind of how do you like, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest, 1 being the easiest, where would you put the ones you have?
That's super easy. I only have one, and I think it might actually be expired or expiring soon. I'm a horrible example here because I actually found it to be great in the sense of getting certified allowed me to like when I got out of the military, I went to work for AT&T because I had a security clearance. The security clearance got me in the door, and I had to then, once I was in there, prove myself on my capabilities. I look at AWS certifications now as kind of the same thing. And so I was able to, when I got my AWS certification, I was able to say, well, screw the cleared world. Let me just use this AWS cert to get my foot in the door. And I've now, for lack of a better term, gotten my foot in the door, and I'm able to prove, outside of a certification that I have, the AWS chops that I think people are looking for. That said, I still think AWS certs are super important, and it's still a nagging thing in the back of my head to say, I only have the SysOps cert, the SysOps associate cert. Traditionally, you would probably also want to get the developer associate, and then probably go towards a DevOps Pro cert.
Okay.
I think Max Anderson, who I mentioned earlier, has the DevOps Pro cert. At some point, I do plan on getting that DevOps Pro, just because it, in my opinion, is the Solutions Architect Pro and the DevOps Pro are really some of the. I mean, just like Rick was saying, it's a fairly complicated cert, and so here Rick got his Solutions Architect Pro the other day. Really motivated me to say I really need to really finish out that learning track that I was down for the DevOps Pro a little bit ago. But I'm also super interested in a lot of the specialty certs that they're coming out with. There's some out there. We used to have a guy named Jeff Bechtel who worked for us that I think he had the networking cert from Amazon. And you could really tell, since he had that cert, I didn't know like what that cert actually meant, but when I started talking to him about a lot of the different networking things with inside of Amazon, he just understood all of that stuff on a completely different level than me. Like, don't get me wrong, I can create a VPC and I can connect up some VPN stuff to it, or make sure two VPCs can talk to each other. But with his networking cert background, he just understood all the inner workings inside of AWS networking, and that was pretty impressive.
That's cool. Now, I think it's really cool because you take this from a very different perspective, right? You have one cert, might be expired. We'll work on that after this call. But you're looking at this from a more managerial perspective, right? And anybody watching this live stream, let it be known, Patrick Pearson is an AWS wizard, and he fixes a lot of friggin' problems and issues and networking problems. I mean, if you have that issue, Patrick's the man, and your clients will never even know he was there. Right? I believe there was a quote once he said, what makes a good DevOps guy? The end client never even knows you touched anything, right? Something like that. But so from a managerial perspective, let's say I'm applying to your team. You mentioned those certs for DevOps. Are those the certs you're looking for? What if I come to you with just an AWS security certification specialty?
I swear I didn't pay you to bring this up, but we just had forget how many actual open recs we had for my team, but it was a lot. And I reviewed 500 to 1,000 resumes since April or something like that. I don't know the exact number. It was a lot. There was a lot of stuff in there. And normally, like, you think about how the recruiting process goes for an organization, you don't realize how many applications come in when you start posting on a lot of these job sites now, that you essentially, a lot of people have to now realize that their resume is going into a system. And while certificates are not the be all end all for what people know, it's getting their foot in the door, because I didn't necessarily rule somebody out because they didn't have a cert, but I definitely looked at people who had certs first. I think that's the key point there is they may be able to, somebody that doesn't have a cert may be able to say like, hey, I know exactly what to do inside of this environment the way that you need me to do it. I will definitely interview them. But the person who has the cert there that shows up in the system first is the person I'm going to be talking to first.
I mean, it just makes sense because you can, without a shadow of a doubt, at least know the terminology, and then you can dig deeper from there, right?
Yeah, and that's really the level set is if somebody has that SysOps cert, I know that I can ask them some specific questions that they have that cert they should know the answer to. You know, if they don't have a cert, they may not know the answer to the question I'm going to ask them. But if they have the cert and they don't know the answer to the question I ask them, that's a red flag.
Interesting. I like that perspective. Now let's head back over to you, Rick. So I want to. So in order to get hired, Patrick is saying, look, you got to get certified, right? Those are the ones he's going to look at first. You've made it through the system, right? If you're in any system, there's filters involved, and so having those certs for a cloud role, like it just makes sense. So real quick, throwing these back up here, you have cloud practitioner, solutions architect associate, and solutions architect professional. Talk to me about what you did training wise for each of those, and kind of the biggest hurdles you had for each. If somebody's looking at this like, okay, I want to go cloud, or I want to go DevOps, or get my foot in the door, like Patrick mentioned, what is it going to take for them to get there?
Okay, so well, for the cloud practitioner, it was mostly just make sure you were kind of familiar with all the different services and what they did from a pretty high level. Mm-hmm. Read the white papers, make sure you're familiar with the well-architected framework, right? And then I think that pretty much takes care of that test. It's great to have some hands-on, interaction. So you went through the console. You don't necessarily have to be a CloudFormation person, right, or a CLI wizard. But that should do fine for that cert, right? Now for the associate, I used A Cloud Guru and Linux Academy. There were 2 courses, and they were very helpful, right, to get through that. And I hammered those courses about a month before, and I got the associate at reInvent last year, nice. Right? But the professional exam, I want to put a shout out to a couple folks, right? One is a guy whose courses I first encountered on Linux Academy, and that is Adrian Cantrell. And he has a website, learn.cantrell.io. And
throw that to me again real quick. It was...
Yeah, https://learn.cantrell.io. And his courses are by far a cut above, right? Hands-on. This is especially true, like, I can't emphasize enough, like just getting your hands on AWS, right, in any capacity. For the associate's exam, I said, look, I need to understand CloudFormation and set up VPCs, right, with CloudFormation, right, and just taking the time to learn CloudFormation and programmatically create your environment using, the concept of infrastructure as a code. That just like drove so many concepts home, right? That when I was sitting on that exam, it's not like I wasn't sweating bullets anyway, taking those tests, right? But it's like, it really just kind of, drove home a lot of those concepts, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're in a situation where you're trying to get these certs, but you're not working with the AWS professionally like we are, right? Because we are exposed to it every day, right? Hands-on, troubleshooting problems, figuring out the different services, et cetera, right? If you're in a situation where you don't work with it professionally every day, Cantrell, Adrian's courses on learn.cantrell.io, he goes above and beyond the Call of Duty with creating really detailed, meaningful demos that you just step through. And after that, you've got the hands-on experience if you faithfully go through those demos, right? Cool. And to brush up for the professional exam, a lot of prep time was spent just, practicing, taking practice exams, because reading those questions are very complicated when compared to the associate and the cloud practitioner exam, right? They're like way harder. You get 2.5 minutes, 2 and some odd minutes, right? For each question. You got 75 questions. I spent a good minute on each question just reading the question, and then the remaining time scanning the answers. And I think and I prepped for 5 months I took 3 courses. I took Adrian Cantrell's course twice because I took it first on Linux Academy, and then I signed up as soon as I figured out that he wasn't on Linux Academy anymore and he had his own website. I took that. I took the other course. I went through the entire course.
Wow.
And then there's another guy, Stefan Marek, right? He's got a great course, no hands-on demos, but what he does is he goes through each section and then he connects the services, right? He shows you what are the alternative service combinations that will achieve a similar thing depending on what you're being asked on the question. Like if you're being asked, hey, look, minimum cost or maximum performance or decouple your architecture, you can piece these AWS services together in such a way to achieve the same overall outcome as far as I need to do X, Y, Z, but you have different criteria, right? If you're on a shoestring budget, you can block people from coming in your network using NACLs, right? If you want to do it a little bit more, elaborately scalable, then you can use a web application firewall, right, on your load balancers, et cetera, et cetera. So just his courses I used to keep everything fresh in your head, because you could go through his course in about a week to a week and a half versus 2 months. It took me 2 months to go through Adrian Cantrell's course faithfully, step by step, right, with the time that I had. So I allocated 2 months to go through there. And then on Tutorials Dojo, John Bonzo, those are the practice exams, right? So I just took practice exams, practice exam. And then I used the AWS resources. I went through their, all their stuff that they had on their website that you can do. So it was a lot of things that you just suck in, right? There's resources out there to help you study. Everybody's journey's a little unique in many ways, right? But those are the 3 primary sources I used, along with whatever AWS provided. And I have to say, I never did pass the AWS professional sample exam, right? You can take the practice exam on AWS, and I'm I never did pass that thing, right? I think the max score I got was 65, and I was happy to get that, and they don't tell you what you get wrong, which is kind of nagging, because if you keep on getting the same thing wrong, pretty much you think that's the right answer, right? So
it's true.
So
well, that's great feedback. Thank you for really diving into that and the resources. So I put the resources in the chat here in LinkedIn. So if you need the resources, for those of you watching, jump into LinkedIn. They're in the chat. Took some notes for you there. So if you want to use those same resources, you can. I think you hit on a few points. Is they do. One of the things that caught me up on the question is they ask, what is the most effective implementation? What is the most cost effective? And so there's multiple right answers, but you got to choose one.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go through these courses with, I'm sure, Cantrill, or the gentleman I used for the Solutions Architect Associate training on Linux Academy and Cloud Gurus, his name was Ryan Kroonenberg.
Oh, yeah, he's good too. Yep.
He's good. And he really talked about here's the terminology that AWS uses. And it was funny because I would read the question, and just because I took his course, I'm okay, this is, taking in streaming data for analytics to be stored later. I'm that immediately, that's Kinesis, right? Just because he'd prepped me already for that. So the first time I took the exam, I studied for 2.5 days, and I was using Safari books. They walked you through a few examples, and it was good content, but there was no labs. You weren't getting hands-on. So from a work perspective, I'm not like Rick or Patrick. I'm fiddling with Kubernetes and cloud deployments, but I'm mostly using the CloudFormation stuff these guys put together to spin up stacks. I'm not hands-on. I'm not putting together SQS, SNS, together with Lambda. That's not where my cup of tea resides. So getting into Cloud Gurus and Linux Academy, they have a training environment that you can jump into and get your hands on the training, these temporary environments that you actually are using AWS on to spin up resources. That was huge for me. The other part was learning about Windows environments, right? So we do a lot with Kubernetes, and, I'm a Mac user, Unix for sure. But all the Windows stuff, I'm pretty sure that's what got me on that first exam, right? So what supports, NSF protocol? I had no idea. I was so Windows retarded. So I went into the first exam and I bombed every single one, I'm sure. This next time I saw, what supports NSF, and there's like 5 questions on it, and you could guarantee I got all of those right each and every time. So, yeah, I'm excited. I think, for this lineup, Patrick, I think it's time you got certified and led by example. I got to throw you under the bus on that one. But
you're not wrong.
So I guess you're going for that DevOps professional. That's fantastic. Are you going to be using Linux Academy? Are you going to be using Cantrell? What's your plan for that?
I've always been a big fan of Linux Academy. I actually, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, was one of their quotes on the Linux Academy website. I don't know what it is about Linux Academy. I just find it easier than the others. But now that they're kind of owned by, is it A Cloud Guru? It's all probably kind of the same. Ultimately, they're all good. It's none of it is replaced by the hands-on stuff. So doing it every single day is the only way, in my opinion.
Yeah,
you can get though. I think if you're working with it, right? I think it's rare that you get every service, right? Like I've never touched SageMaker. I'm not into machine learning at this point. Right? I'd like to learn more about it, but I don't think you depending on what you do, right? I'm keeping really hot on like API gateway, Route 53, Lambda serverless, right? SQS, SNS, those types of things, Kinesis. But then there's guys in my team that specialize in Glue and Spark and that sort of stuff, right? And they're really good at that. And if you're go ahead.
Patrick. Yeah, you can see Amazon's headed that way with their certification program with all the specialties, because they realize that they, even internally, they don't have, there's probably a few people that know all of the different services, and the one of them starts with Werner and goes down from the CTO. It's those guys. The rest of the organization, they don't use all of the services.
Right.
It's true. But I think there's a few lessons to be learned. So we got about 2 minutes left, gentlemen, and I want to thank you guys again for coming on. I'll give you each another shout out here in a second, but a couple of the lessons that I learned from you, gentlemen. From a managerial perspective, these certs are going to get you into interviews as opposed to not having a cert at all. So consider taking a few of these, even if it's just a cloud practitioner and cloud solutions architect associate, where you don't have to have a ton of hands-on. We recommend it through training and using the free tier, et cetera. Get your hands on, understand what you're actually doing, so it's not just all book knowledge, but that will get you into the interview so you can get your foot in the door, like Patrick mentioned. Then what Rick said is he said practice and go through the content twice. That's what I heard from you, Rick. Really study it, learn it, find a good resource that works for your learning style, and come back to it once right before the exam a second time so that it's fresh on top of your mind. You have the verbiage, the terminology, and you'll be able to select between those ifs and statements and the multiple choices where there's more than one answer correct. Gentlemen, am I missing anything?
I might just be a little slow, but that worked for me.
Not a problem. Rick,
do it. That's really it. It's just actually sit down and take the time.
Yep, that's it. And let me get you guys all on the screen here real quick. Rick Miller, thanks so much. Patrick Pearson, live streaming here on LinkedIn. We appreciate everybody who watched and who will watch this in the future. If you guys have any questions, please connect with these gentlemen. They are both AWS wizards, and they are a wealth of knowledge. So guys, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Go